Welcome, everybody. We will be beginning soon. Welcome, everyone, to our wonderful and exciting program, Black Resistance, put on by the collaborative effort of different organizations on Martha's Vineyard. Welcome, welcome. We'll ask our participants to turn their cameras off. And their audience, feel free to use the chat room for any of your comments and put your questions in the Q&A box. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carole Copeland Thomas. You'll hear from me in just a few minutes, but I want to introduce two of the leaders of this collaborative effort who will welcome all of us to the program today, Dr. Lorna Chambers-Andrade and Marie Arajo. Welcome. So our chairs are going to come on and you can cut your cameras on.
I don't know what's happening with my camera.
You're on.
I'm not seeing a thing. Okay, welcome everybody. The Vineyarders and those of you out in America, welcome to our 7th annual Black History Collaborative. This program has 5 institutions presenting today and in the past: ASALH, the Association on the Study of African American History; the NAACP, Martha's Vineyard Branch; the League of Women Voters, Martha's Vineyard Branch; the Martha's Vineyard Museum; and the Oak Bluffs Library. At this time, we would ask Marie, would you like to open us up with a prayer, please?
Yes. In our highest hope, we see that the world is one great family, where it is possible that none go hungry, where it is possible that justice, love, and health abound, where it is possible that we may never question our oneness.
Thank you, Marie. We want to thank Dr. Carter G. Woodson, father and founder of Black History Education, which captures American history. Did you know that we celebrate Black history in many countries around the world? Now, let us begin with our program today. So at this time, it is a great pleasure that I introduce to you a friend of ours as well, who has presented before, Carole Copeland Thomas. Carole graduated from Emory University and postgraduate of a Northeastern University, Boston, with an MBA. She is certified in diversity, meeting professional designs from the International Association of Hispanic Meeting Professionals in 2011 through 15 and on. She's certified tour manager, and the International Academy awarded her this. She is a TEDx channel presenter and presented on Facing Fears. Please, when you get a chance, go to TEDx and listen to her talk about facing fears. She is an adjunct professor at Bentley University and has co-founded an international organization with 9 other women as a result of 2005 year trip to Kenya. The group continues on in Unitarian projects. Her most recent projects are the Worldwide Multicultural Conference, where she has over 70 speakers from 12 countries or more on 6 of the 7 continents. I would like to also share with you that she is currently the Vice President and Interim Chief Diversity Officer at Curry College in Milton, Massachusetts. Her position has been extended even through this year. Carole is a devoted mother of 3 adult children and their husbands, along with 2 grandchildren, daughters. Carole is an extraordinaire with family unification. And I just have a little picture to show you. I hope you can see this. This is her family, beautiful, beautiful family. Okay. She exudes joy, love, and justice, breaking the shackles to heal us all. Now, with the memory of the embrace that was unveiled in Boston, the statue of Dr. Martin Luther King, she is presenting to us today, Black Resistance with Harriet Tubman. Without further ado, Carole Copeland Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andrade, for that very, very warm welcome. Very warm introduction. I thank you so very much. I'm glad to be with you now. I think maybe 3 years in some kind of capacity. So again, I certainly appreciate all the warm and kind words that you have shared with me. Thank you very much. I'm going to, so Dr. Lorna, you can now cut your camera off and we'll just move forward. Thank you so very much. I want to just correct one thing, that I had a wonderful relationship for over 10 years with Bentley University. It was called Bentley College at one point in time and now called Bentley University. And I was an adjunct faculty member there. I have worked at Roxbury Community College, continue to run my business for now 36 years. And last year was given the opportunity to serve as the interim Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President at Curry College. And that contract has been extended through the end of this semester as we identify my replacement. So that's a wonderful assignment and I'm enjoying it quite a bit, and also learning some of the dynamics that are going on in higher education and how it's affecting faculty, staff, students, and administrators in the community at large. The theme today deals with Black resistance. And I think more than ever, as I look at what we are facing with the execution of Tyre Nichols that took place, and he died sadly on January 10th. When we look at things that are taking place across the country and legislation that is being passed, and most specifically what's taking place in Florida, Black resistance and the celebration of Black history is important now more than ever before. It's important for a number of reasons as we look at this courageous woman of faith and action and courage. a little bit more in detail, because there is going to be, I feel, a call to action for each and every one of us to play an important part in not only recognizing and celebrating Black history, but doing it in a way that cultures matter in a multicultural country. And you can have cultures to stand up and boldly profess their identity, their characteristics, their values, their traditions in a way that can be all American and in a way that can interlink with other cultures and values. And it's going to take, in our instance, Black resistance, because the forces, the loud forces of resistance on the other side are becoming louder and more influential than ever. Now, we know that some, 150 years ago or so at this point in time, we did have Reconstruction that took place after the Civil War. And so a lot of my message is going to talk about history. It's going to play a part of history. And I welcome you to put your questions in the Q&A box. I'm really looking at this as a conversation. So I'd love to have your questions, and then you can put your comments in the chat box. But when I look at Reconstruction and those years of great victories and record breaking achievements that took place in the South right after the Civil War, and obviously in part of the North, and Black representation that became part of Congress during that time, and all of that galvanized and then almost came to a screeching halt around the middle to the late 1870s, when legislation creeped into state policies and state legislatures passed laws in their states that then began to restrict Black movement. It began to restrict how people could be elected and who could vote. It began to restrict who could get certain jobs and how those jobs could be obtained. And then also, hand in hand with the legislation that was passed across the country based on the states, we also had the violence and the resistance again on the other side to maintain and enforce this kind of oppression that took hold in the United States in the late 1800s and certainly through the early 1900s until we had the mobilization that ultimately culminated to be called the Civil Rights Movement. So Reconstruction back during the 1870s was a reaction to the victory of the Civil War, and then came the resistance to Reconstruction that then clamped everything down and made discriminatory practices and oppression even greater. Well, that was during that time. And I fast forward now to 2023, where some of those same patterns we are seeing today. This time last year, I was on the bandwagon to profess and to protect the theory and the concept of critical race theory. I've had a program about it. I've spoken about it at the National Black MBA Association. I have a website, a web page that has a lot of information about it. I'll actually put it in the chat a little later on where you can learn about critical race theory. I'm so grateful that our political party here in Massachusetts that I worked with, the Massachusetts Democratic Party, has passed a resolution in support of critical race theory. A very bold and triumphant resolution. So I know what can be done so that we don't go into a second Reconstruction and then the kind of restrictive measures that can take place. It takes Black resistance. And it takes that when you look at our heroes and sheroes that we've had in this country, including, I have a whole list of them. I look at Ida B. Wells. And I have a wonderful assistant at Curry College who's doing a lot of research on the Elaine, Arkansas race riots that took place in 1919. He just spoke about it to an international audience. And Ida B. Wells has written a very small book about the Elaine race riots. These are things that we need to be aware of because of its importance and its impact so that we don't repeat history. We look at Dorothy Height, the great Dorothy Height, who was a civil rights giant and leader in her own right. We look at A. Philip Randolph, who was one of the organizers and the orchestrators of the March on Washington in 1963, and also was head of the Union for the Pullman Porters all those years before the 1963 Civil Rights Movement took place. Dr. Martin Luther King, who collaborated with A. Philip Randolph. We obviously know his history, and we just celebrated his birthday last month. Along with Dr. King, I have to mention Reverend Ralph, and his wife, Juanita Abernathy, my very, very dear friends, the closest associates to the King family, and all that they endured, all that they went through, all of the challenges and opportunities that faced all of the civil rights leaders, leading up to our first Black president, the 44th president, Barack Obama. And when you look at the 2008 time period, you begin to look at this resistance movement on the other side, really galvanizing and coming into full force, the Tea Party. And now we have all of these fringe groups that are taking place that are anti-Black, they're anti-Jewish, they're anti-immigrant, they're anti-everything. If you're not in a mainstream profile position, then these groups often will take up arms against those of us who are not, quote, mainstream in terms of our hue. And we know what happened on January 6th of 2020 and the prosecution that is taking place. So I want to talk to you about a woman who was part of the Black resistance movement back in the early 1800s, well through the late 1800s, that has become symbolized and memorialized for her bold and courageous actions that took place so that we could maintain this sense of dignity and freedom for as long as we possibly could, even though Reconstruction was at an ending point toward the late 1870s and certainly well into the 1880s. Let me share with you a brief clip, and I'm going to do it just as I set this up and say, last in December, I had the opportunity to go to a travel conference, a cultural travel conference. I'm on the board of what is now called Meet Boston, traditionally called the Greater Boston Convention and Visitors Bureau, and I chair the Multicultural Committee, as I've done for the past 20 years. And so I was asked and invited to go to this travel conference, Multicultural Travel Conference in upstate New York. So as I'm driving with one of my colleagues, Michael Munn, who is one of the staff members, and we're driving and driving and driving way into upstate New York, the thought came to me, why are we having a conference in upstate New York? That's number one. And why are we going to this town, Auburn, New York, that I know virtually nothing about? So that's where my head was in early December as we were approaching this conference. Little did I realize that that particular meeting and that particular occasion would dramatically change my way of thinking, particularly about this one woman who lived there for over 50 years. She bought a piece of property there in 1859 before the Civil War started. She was an absolutely courageous woman. So as we approached and then got to our hotel along with our other colleagues, and I began to look around, and the conference took place the next day, it dawned on me, and I realized that this is where Harriet Tubman had landed, and her operation had flourished for, as I said, over 50 years. There's a lot even a diversity professional like me can learn, an awful lot. So I want to play a clip for you, and then I'm going to play another clip for you just to give you a sense of the power of this woman. I I am just so in awe of her now, having gone to actually see where she lived for all that time, that it made me stop and realize that there is a responsibility that all of us have to go back and review these great legendary leaders in our country that we may have some knowledge about, but we need to learn more about them. And that is what I'm doing now as I look at the life of Harriet Tubman. She was born around 1822. They're not quite sure what year. She was born in Maryland, a family of 9. She could have been born in 1820, and she says she was born in 1825. Not quite sure. She was born into an enslaved family in Maryland. And as a child, as happened, sometimes she was rented out to different plantations, different houses, never really treated well. There's a story where she was maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, and she was supposed to take care of babies. And if the baby cried at night, babies cry, she would be beaten because the baby cried. Her job was to keep the babies quiet. There was one episode where she actually she was lent out and she was working at this home again as a child, and she spotted on the dining room table something she had not seen before, and they happened to be sugar cubes. Now, if you're 6, 7 years old, you're curious about lots of things. Well, she slowly creeped up and she grabbed one of those sugar cubes and tasted it, and she liked it and probably ate as much as she could of it, until the owner of that home, woman, very maliciously so, was going to beat her again. Well, she ran away at that time and hid in a pigsty for a couple of days before finally leaving, coming back, and probably was beaten. Slaves were beaten mercilessly during that time. Don't ever let anyone tell you that slaves were taken care of and their life was easy, because it was not. You can certainly see movies like 12 Years a Slave and other movies that's where a free Black man was put into slavery and spent 12 years in slavery before escaping to go back home. And he wrote his autobiography about it. So again, the life of a slave was a life of drudgery, was a life of violence in some instances, was a life of dehumanization, as had been set up and established in the Constitution, where we were considered 3/5 of a person. So here you have Araminta Ross. That is Harriet Tubman's birth name. She took the name of Harriet Tubman after marrying John Tubman, her first husband, and she changed to Harriet in memory and in total tribute to her mother, who was still living at that time. So this woman who had gone through just so much, beaten just beyond belief as a child for minor infractions. And then even at one point when she was a young teenager, being sent to the store on an errand, and there was a runaway slave who was escaping this particular store that she had gone into, and the supervisor demanding that she help him catch the slave. They actually got him, I guess, buckled down. He managed to escape. As he was running behind Araminta, this person picks up a lead weight, picks up a heavy weight, throwing it at the escaped slave, and accidentally hit Araminta, who we now know as Harriet Tubman, in the head. And that then caused her, she obviously blacked out, had to recuperate, and that caused her to have a lifetime of seizures, narcolepsy, they say she probably had, where she would black out, had visions, etc., until she died. She actually had a surgery here in Boston late in her life to try to control the seizures that just never ended. But those seizures, that health infraction, led to almost a rebirth of an absolutely giant figure. This is a woman who never learned how formally to read or write. She never learned how to do that, but she would listen to her higher power and did so in such a way where she miraculously carried out these escape procedures, these escape campaigns, successful campaigns, one after the other. So I'm going to take you back to this place in Auburn, New York, where in 1859, she bought her first piece of property, and then a couple of years later, bought a second piece of property. And I'll bring you up to date in terms of what actually happened during that time. This was largely with the help of William Seward. You probably know the name. Two reasons why. Number one, he became the Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln. Number two, he was the principal campaigner for us buying Alaska from Russia, but a great man in terms of being a great friend and supporter of Harriet Tubman. So I'm going to play a little clip from a Reverend Paul Carter, who was a fantastic tour guide with this estate, the Harriet Tubman estate, now 31 acres of land. And he'll give you a little bit of information. He is an AME Zion minister, and you will hear a little bit more about him. This is Reverend Paul Carter.
And I say that because there was this free black man named John Tubman. And John Tubman would go from plantation to plantation doing work. And on some occasions, he would come to the plantation where she was. Well, eventually they got to know each other. And so he wanted to marry her. Well, the book says that John Tubman was a dark-skinned mulatto. Minty simply said, he was tall. And he was handsome. That's how she explained it. Well, they got to know each other. He wanted to marry, so he convinced her enslaver, Mr. Brodess, to allow them to get married. Mr. Brodess did allow it to happen, but he would not give her freedom just because she had married a free man. And we believe he didn't give her freedom because he understood that as long as she was enslaved, if there were ever any children born to that marriage, those children would never belong to Minty. The children would never belong to John. The children would belong to him. Therefore, he could use those children for whatever financial reasons he wanted to. So it was up to him to keep her enslaved as long as he could. You have to understand that the condition of the children was always the same condition as the mother. Remember me telling you about the house and how much she paid for it, right?
Right.
How much? $1,200, that's right. Well, if you look across the field, you'll see a brick house with a barn behind it. That's the property that she purchased with the help of William Seward. The brick house that's on the property now is not the original house. The original house was a wood-framed house. There was a fire there in the 1880s. The house burned to the ground, but her second husband, nephews, and brothers were brick masons. So they built a brick house on the same foundation where the wood-framed house once stood. That house is not open now for tours because it's in the process of being restored. The last family to live in Harriet's house before they started restoration was me and my family. It was not the best living conditions by no spark of the imagination, but it was an honor to live in Harriet's house before they started restoration.
Wow.
So I think about that, and I think about just the sacrifices made. Reverend Carter goes on with his wonderful tour and talks about how the 25 acres of land, you saw that White House became her home for the aged, the home for those who didn't have a home. And she actually died in that White House that you saw. So I want you to know, contrary to some of the biographies and the biographical videos that I've seen where they talk about Harriet Tubman dying as a pauper, penniless, please don't believe that. She died having bequeathed ultimately 31 acres of land to the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. I'm an AME, but there's also the AME Zion denomination, and she was a part of that, and she bequeathed her property to the AME church. So she was not a, quote, poor woman who was penniless and homeless. That is not true at all. When you go to Auburn, New York, you're actually going to see that White House where she actually lived for part of her late life and ultimately died. The other part of her life was in the brick home that used to be a wooden home. So being on that property, learning about her life, learning about the first husband, and she went and escaped first with her brothers in 1849. They didn't want to go all the way. They got scared on the way, and then they all turned back. She turned back with her brothers, but then her owner died, and she realized that the owner's wife was going to begin selling off the slaves. She, at that point, had the narcolepsy issues, and so she was sickly. But also during that time, prior to that time, while she was a younger girl, her father worked in the lumber area of the plantation area, and she worked with him and built up her strength, worked outside, did some other work. She set up muskrat traps and others. So she knew her way around woods and areas outside, which ultimately would lead to the great work that she did in terms of resistance. So here it is, fast forward 1849, and her slave owner wife is about to probably sell her off, and the brothers and sisters, and she just said no, because she had Black resistance in her blood. It was in her blood, and she ultimately escaped on her own, reaching ultimately Philadelphia. That led, because of the Underground Railroad, she connected with the Underground Railroad. That led her to getting herself established first in Philadelphia, learning how to make money on her own. And her goal was to go on and reach her relatives and bring them to freedom. She wanted to bring them to freedom. And so some 13 trips back and forth to the South, freeing her, ultimately her parents, ultimately her brothers, her sisters. 3 of her sisters had been sold off into slavery. So she knew that if she didn't get to them in time, the rest of her relatives being sold off into slavery in the Deep South would make it virtually impossible to be found and led to an escape path. Actually, by 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act had been found, and it became very, very difficult and dangerous to free slaves because of the resistance movement on the other side to keep and clamp slavery in place. So the stories of how she would hide herself, how she would dress up, how she would do things, she knew how to probably wiggle her way from point A to point B and do it with such finesse, working with the Underground Railroad participants, but doing it in a way, an effective way, where her Black resistance led to the freedom of some, ultimately about 700 to 1,000 slaves. That includes the work that she did during the Civil War, when she became the first Black commander of a unit in South Carolina that ultimately freed 700 slaves during the Civil War. So the 300 that she probably saved before the war, and then the 700 during the war, along with the other work, talk about Black resistance. That is Harriet Tubman. So she died in 1913. She was probably 91, 93 years old. Obviously a lifetime of the head problems, but a lifetime of service, first for herself and freeing herself and her family members and friends and other slaves who wanted to be free. Yes, she did carry a gun for protection, but also as a reminder for those slaves who were on that underground network with her that she was not playing, that they could not go back. There was not a plan B, because they would have then given away her mechanisms in terms of how she was freeing slaves. So yeah, she did that so that they would get the message the way they needed to get the message. A courageous, courageous woman. So I fast forward, and I want you to ask me questions over these next 10 minutes that I'm going to speak with you. I fast forward because we need to look at the Harriet Tubman of that time period and the kind of resistance and Black resistance that's needed now when we look at critical race theory under attack for no reason at all. I don't know why it's under attack, because it's never been taught in schools at all. I've been doing this work for 36 years. I've worked with some of the best diversity professionals in the United States and outside of the US. We never talked about critical race theory, and we know that it was not ever taught in schools. It was a law school concept and a theory looking at the predatory, discriminatory practices of race in the United States, but from a theoretical perspective. I'm looking at the resistance that we need to now have as people of action, regardless of your skin color, so that we can stand up and say no to the hate, the violence, and the sheer ignorance that is taking place in this country today. I just had to, on my LinkedIn page, correct a colleague. I was really surprised about this colleague making a comment about the labels that we have here in the United States and the work that I'm doing and my other colleagues with our US-UK Summit on Race, where we're bringing people of color together on both sides of the pond and talking about these issues. And his comment went on, this is a public comment, it's on board. He said, well, isn't it, we should really look at what the Brits are doing, because in Britain and in the UK, they're just called Brits, that's all. There are no labels that are used like we use here in the US. He couldn't have been more wrong. He could not have been more incorrect. When we look at the practices, the issues that we face in the United States, they are very similar, if not identical, to what's taking place in the UK and other countries. 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, when George Floyd was brutally murdered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, there was a worldwide outcry of, no, we can't have this to happen. And it started here, obviously in the US with the protests, but it spread to the United Kingdom and France and other parts of the world because of the discrimination for Black people taking place in those countries. So my friend and colleague was totally wrong when he said everybody in these other countries are just thought of as one category. That's not true. And that's why the education that I'm providing and others are providing is so important, and looking carefully at the lives of people like Harriet Tubman are so significant and so very important. So we go down, as I, in my remarks here, we go down and we look at Ron DeSantis and the destruction that he is conducting in the state of Florida as their governor. I'm baffled as to what's taking place and what's allowed to be taking place, but I'm reminded that if we're not careful, as George Santayana said, those who fail to learn the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat them. We could have the end of a second Reconstruction, should I say, if we sit back, say nothing, and do nothing. First of all, he was successful last year in getting a Don't Say Gay bill passed, and also tied in with that was an anti-critical race theory bill that was passed and went into effect in July of 2022. That bill prevented school teachers in elementary schools from even discussing or talking anything about the LGBTQ community, about transgender issues, etc. And there were other restrictions put on public school teachers in terms of what they could and couldn't say. If you look back to September of 2020, when Donald Trump passed an executive order banning diversity training programs for federal agencies and federal contractors, my business was impacted by that. I was working with a large, and still working with a large multinational company. I was scheduled to do race training the very next day after that bill passed, and my work was canceled because this company was a federal contractor and they didn't want to run afoul of this executive decision that was made. For some of my colleagues and friends, they lost lots of business because of that executive order. Well, the order was overridden in January of 2021 when Joe Biden became president, but the damage had already been done. You see, what happened was that not only was that executive order the framework and the starter of those who began to retaliate against Black Lives Matter, demonizing Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, it, in some instances, as many as 34 states then passed legislation that restricted this kind of language and work being done in their states. You see the pattern I'm talking about? You go back to 1870s and the legislation that started to take place with Southern states in particular, and this pattern is now happening today. And so fast forward, you have the state of Florida leading the way in terms of censorship, and I say it's fascism. And now looking at AP courses on Black history that have been truly vetted are strong programs that now are not going to be taught on a voluntary basis. These are elective classes that high schoolers can take because the governor has said, no, this is anti-American. This is not the way we should treat and deal with people of color and Black people, which then totally erases and changes history. You get my point. Black resistance is needed now more than ever. There was also an objection that he had about the queer theory that is part of this curriculum. Black queer theory. He didn't know why that was in the books. If you look at some of the greatest authors, James Baldwin, if you look at some of the greatest singers and actors and entertainers in the Black community, many of them are gay. Many of them have just faced lots of discrimination just because of their sexual gender identity and their sexual orientation. And so I can understand why queer theory would be part of this curriculum because of the intersectionality, which is a very valid point, of the LGBTQ community, the Black community, the resistance, and all the kind of combination issues that could be discussed. But this won't be discussed in Florida because one man is on a campaign to become president. He wants to become president, but also to change what history actually is into what history could be based on his perspective and those who want to have an alternative way of looking at history. So I go back to the importance of Harriet Tubman and the significance of what she did under circumstances that just are beyond belief. How she was able to save and lead all of these slaves to freedom. How she was able to have this kind of resistance movement in place that kept her safe ultimately, where she never lost a slave and where she became a leading figure in the Civil War and beyond the Civil War, certainly after the Civil War, getting involved in women's rights issues and the like. So a couple of things in closing is that I want you to really look at the importance of how we can make a difference through the resistance that we have by understanding historical figures like Harriet Tubman and others that can give us not only the encouragement and the inspiration, but also the accurate historical realities that were faced during the times when they were reaching their goals under horrendous circumstances. So we need to look at the actuality and the factual nature of history. We need to share that information, and that includes, here we are in the month of February with Black History, and doing things in a way that we stand up and we say, no, absolutely not, to the restrictive measures being put in place that will shut down and censor the way educators in particular can share the truth about American history. We can do it by sharing the accurate stories of Harriet Tubman in a way that will help all of us to identify and understand our place and our relationship with our country today, but also our past. And so go back and read up on Harriet Tubman. I didn't even have a chance to read a quote from the first biography of Harriet Tubman, written by Sarah Bradford, who wrote this book. I think you can probably see this. This is a book that you can still get on Amazon, Harriet Tubman, The Moses of Her People. Sarah Bradford wrote this book during the time of Harriet Tubman to raise money, help her to raise money for her causes. And you can read about some of the stories in the book. Read the story about Joe in the book, who wanted to escape and was on the Freedom Trail with Harriet Tubman because he knew he would always be less than on that plantation. And the book uses the N word. I won't use that word with you, but the N word is in the book because that was the language that was used during that time. And that's why I think that word is just so despicable today. But this book will give you an accurate representation of what took place with Harriet Tubman during that time and what she had to go through in order to bring all those people to freedom. We have our responsibility in terms of our resistance. And I'm sure that you'll listen to the other presenters today and learn about the importance of their organizations and how resistance has been carried out, certainly with Carter G. Woodson and ASALH, and certainly with the League of Women Voters and the NAACP and the library and the museum and the other organizations that have come together to put forth this agenda so that we can always appreciate and respect and understand the importance of Black history, because Black history certainly is American history. And figures like Harriet Tubman have significantly contributed to this country. And she died a rich and wealthy woman, as far as I'm concerned. That property, 31 acres of land in Auburn, New York, that I knew nothing about, still in the hands of the AME Zion Church in partnership with the National Park Service. The church owns the land, all of it. They partner with the Park Service so that they can continue to tell the importance of this story to school children, to older children, to adults, to seniors, to everyone who will listen to this woman and her level of Black resistance and how it literally helped to liberate the entire nation. I thank you so much, and I'm sure we have some questions here. Love to have them. So Allison, take it away, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
All right. Hi there. So I don't know if you can hear me, but
Yes.
We've had a couple of questions come through. So first of all, Marie Doubledays lets us know that the chat is disabled. So I'm not sure if that's something we want to turn on.
Okay. All right. I'll work on that.
All right. It might just give folks an opportunity to check in with each other as the rest of the program proceeds. One of the questions we had come through from Joan Condon is, what are the strategies and tactics to stop the hate and the state laws being passed in Florida? Which is such an important question. And I had a few resources that I posted as an answer just to start the discussion, but I'll leave that to you to try to untangle.
Yeah. First of all, realize if you're in Massachusetts that we are impacted by what's taking place in Florida. The strategy with those on the conservative side, I think you can probably use chat now because I allowed everyone to participate, so you certainly can use that for comments. But what is happening, this is a strategy that goes back probably 30 years, is that the conservative wing of the Republican Party, I'm going to make this partisan, know how to strategically place people on the lowest rung of state and local systems, and that includes the school boards. And so they go after these local positions and they plant their individuals so that the policies can start at that level and then work their way up. Now, my daughter is she's a Democrat, and she is the chair of the West Hartford Board of Education. And I have witnessed now 2 of her meetings in person that were uprooted and very, very vocal and disruptive by parents who were literally talking the party line and talking from this very right-wing conservative faction, and very threatening, to the point that there were police outside while these meetings were taking place, and the news media inside the meetings. They had some, quote, controversial policies that they were able to successfully get passed, but there was a very resistant level of parent activities, because they know that you begin to infiltrate people on the school board level, and then it just moves up from there. So my point is, pay attention to what's taking place in local communities here in Massachusetts. There have been activities where they've tried to silence and stop transgender activities. I know it for a fact, with various school boards, and then other legislation that is trying to be passed on these local issues with local school boards, city council, et cetera, that can mimic and mirror what's taking place in Florida. So I would say you look at the comparison, and then look at what's taking place across the country in terms of critical race theory. I will put the link during a little bit later in this program, where you can actually learn more about critical race theory and learn how you can monitor and find out what's going on across the country. So it takes a little research, a little leg room, but please don't think that what is happening down there, and I know we have friends from all over the country who are here. We'd love to hear from where you're from. You can put that in the chat also, but you certainly need to understand the importance of what is happening in one part of the country can very, very quickly spread and impact the rest of the US, including Massachusetts.
Okay, that's such a wonderful answer, Carole, thank you. So a couple of other questions were mostly having to do with the video of this program, which is, do we have permission to post this video, and where is it going to be? So I said in the chat answer, and I'll post it in the actual chat as well, the Q&A answer, I should say, that the library has posted the recording of this video on our YouTube channel after the video has been finalized. So you can look for it there again this year, I'm hoping. I haven't checked with Carole about that, but I'm thinking that we can do the same that we've done in years past.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, wonderful. And then finally, Marie Doubleday says she can see the chat comment, but she still can't comment in the chat.
Okay, so there's an opportunity, it says to everyone, so I changed it to everyone. So if you put your question there, then everyone should be able to see it. I know that Allison said, "Good morning, America." So good morning, everyone. So I see that. And so just see if you have an opportunity to put the comments, and I'll work on that throughout the rest of the program too. I think Allison is chatting away, and she's probably putting another.
Yeah, and that's it. If anyone else has any questions through the program, you can use the Q&A button below and ask your questions, and it periodically will pull it up and answer those questions.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. We're going to take a brief break for about 5 minutes and then come back and hear some powerful presentations from our other community and collaborative leaders. So just relax, get a cup of coffee. We'll be back in about 5 minutes, and I'll work on that chat too.
Carole?
Yes.
It's Lorna.
Lorna.
Could you read what I wrote in the chat? Because I don't think you could. Something's wrong. And the other thing is, I tried to put in a question just to see if it was working. It didn't go in. My question wouldn't go in either.
Okay, we'll work on that. We will.
Okay.
I do see that there were some questions that came in and some were answered. So I see that. So I think our Q&A box is working fine, but I'll certainly take a look at chat. And right now it says that you can send chat to everyone. So everyone should be able to use the chat. I'm going to probably put something in here now. I'm just going to say hello to everybody, and let me know if this hello has come through. Did everyone see the all caps hello that I sent?
I see that, but it says on mine to Marie Arujo.
Okay, so change that to everyone. So change, if you have a chat box, make sure you change it to everyone, and then everybody will see your comments.
All right, to everyone.
Uh-huh.
How to do that. Direct
You
message.
just click on the blue where it says Marie, just click on that blue and it'll change, and then you'll be able.
Got it. Now, can you see what I wrote up above about Seward? Has relatives living here on the island?
Dr. Lorna, write it again in the chat box, and then I'll be able to see it. So for everyone, make sure that the 2 is going to everyone, and then we'll be able to see your message. Now I see Tony Kaufman. She says, good morning. Okay. So I see that. Everybody should see that because it says Tony Kaufman to everyone. So write your comments, but make sure your comments, Dr. Andrade, I see, Dr. Lorna, I see what you've written. Seward has relatives here on the island. Interesting. Yes. So make sure you change so that everyone will be able to read your comments. All right.
Great. Okay.
So we can have fun over the next 5 minutes just doing some Q&A, writing in the chat box and writing our comments in the chat box.
Carol, I think that that everyone is, I still think people can't add a chat unless they're a panelist. It's only panelists that are so far chatting in the chat box.
Well, I've changed it to everyone. So I'll ask Marie and our friends who are out there, our attendees such as Joycelyn and Alan and Beatrice, if you would attempt to put a comment in the chat box and make sure it says everyone. And if it does not work, put a comment in the Q&A box. And if it is not working, then we'll just have to use Q&A for both chat and Q&A. And I do apologize for those who are not able to put comments in the chat box. Just go on and use the Q&A box for that same purpose. And while the other part of the program is going on, I will do my very best to see if we can get that corrected. A little different when you use the webinar platform. And I thank you all for the brief intermission that we've had here. We're going to continue on with our program. And again, I'll work on the chat feature. And in the meantime, you can just go on and continue to use the Q&A box. And we thank you so very much. We'll continue the program now with Heather Seeger, who is representing the Martha's Vineyard Museum. Heather, take it away.
Thanks, Carol, and thanks for your really inspiring remarks about Harriet Tubman. My name is Heather Seeger, and I'm the Executive Director of the Martha's Vineyard Museum. We're really honored to be asked once again to be co-presenters for this important program kicking off Black History Month. I love this year's theme of Black resistance, and I want to share some pieces from the museum's collection that speak to the theme. But first, I want to share a few things about the museum itself. This summer, the museum will celebrate 100 years since its incorporation in 1923. And as we prepare for this milestone anniversary, we've been using it as an opportunity not only to look back and reflect on our own history, but more importantly, to look forward at who we want to become in our second century on the island. What are the new ways that we'll be serving the community of Martha's Vineyard? Whose history are we here to collect, preserve, and display and interpret? For most of our first 100 years, the museum was really focused on the island's colonial past and its whaling heyday. And to this day, our collection reflects this narrow focus. Though for the past decade, we've been working hard to fill in the gaps and hope that many of you watching today will start to think about the photos, papers, paintings, ticket stubs, flyers, t-shirts that your family keeps in your home. Donating your vineyard-specific items to the museum will ensure that 100 years from now, we're more fully and accurately able to tell the stories of Martha's Vineyard. Over the next few years, the museum will be going through an evolution, focusing more on the community who love this island, whether they're year-round or seasonal. And for those of you who are part of our community, we hope you'll share your suggestions and your feedback as we experiment with new types of exhibitions and programs. The museum is open all year round and has a number of interesting things happening each month. If you're not a member yet, please consider becoming one. It not only comes with discounts for our cafe, shop, and programs, but it gives you unlimited admission to the museum, so you can come visit whenever you like. There are plenty of exhibitions you'll want to see, whether it's Unfreedom, which is now up in our Grain Family Gallery, which explores enslavement, indenture, and incarceration on Martha's Vineyard. Or the one about Dorothy West and her ties to the Harlem Renaissance, which will be up all summer. Each time you visit, we promise there'll be something new to see. So on to the theme of Black resistance, which we've been thinking about from two angles at the museum. Both joy as an act of resistance and protest as an act of resistance. Of course, they're intimately related to one another, but take really different forms. I'm going to share my screen as I get started. Okay. So joy as an act of resistance. Since the late 19th century, African Americans have been coming to this island. And for nearly all of our country's history, systemic racism and oppression were the norms throughout America. During the fraught period leading up to the Civil Rights Movement, Black families, many of whom were middle class and in professional fields, started making their way to the Vineyard and making the Vineyard an annual and vital family vacation. Joyfully gathering, enjoying the beach with their children and friends, sundowning on the porches of the highlands and around the island. Many of the images that we have in our collection from that time really affirm that both dignity and humanity, in stark contrast to how mainstream America has tended to portray Blackness. And unfortunately, many of these portrayals continue to this day, making the wonder that is Oak Bluffs on an August afternoon countercultural in so many ways to the America of 1923 or 2023. Joy is an act of resilience and strength. And on Martha's Vineyard, we see Black joy and Black excellence at their finest. Protest as a form of resistance. In 2020, the museum had an exhibition entitled Making Change, Stories of Vineyard Activism, that connected local stories of protest to larger social justice movements across the United States. In this exhibition, the museum featured images and stories from 1820 to 2020, including this image here, which was connected to the founding of the NAACP branch on Martha's Vineyard. The protest stories ranged from the island's connection to the Underground Railroad to the Black Lives Matter marches in June of 2020. Through this exhibit, we attempted to make clear that there's a long tradition of protest against injustice on Martha's Vineyard, and we tried to prioritize elevating the voices of Native Americans and African Americans. Through her oral history work, of course, the museum's Lindsay Lee has been recording the memories of island activists for almost 30 years, both contemporary and historical memories. Many of these interviews can be found on the YouTube channel can be found on YouTube. So if you search the MV Museum Oral History channel, you can find a whole list of them there, and we've organized them so that you can look up all of the African American oral histories that we have in our collection. Whether it's her fascinating interview with Dorothy Burnham in Vineyard Voices 3, where she talks about her involvement in the civil rights movement beginning in the 1930s. Dorothy is now 108 and visited the museum this past summer for the opening of Grow As We Are. You can see her here in front of the portrait of her on her porch. Lindsay's also interviewed the organizers of Black Lives Matter. Lindsay also interviewed the organizers of the Black Lives Matter March in June of 2020, which we're going to listen to in just a moment. I do want to say, as I play the video of this interview, we see a lot of the protest signs that were made at that time, and it really, of course, the protests that year were inspired by and took place in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And, you know, here we are almost 3 years later and really sort of thinking deeply about Tyree Nichols and his family. And so I'm just really struck by both how far we've come sometimes and how it can feel like we're staying in the same place. I want to let these impressive young people have the last word and hope for their continued involvement in the resistance movement, both with acts of joy and acts of protest. The museum really looks forward to continuing to be a venue where all of this important storytelling can take place, and hopes that you'll all find ways to get involved and join us in our work.
Friday on Juneteenth, there's another march and protest that was organized by a young woman who's white. And I think that And, even just like not people of color, like you can be East Asian, a person of color. You don't have the same experience as a Black person or someone who identifies as Latinx or someone who, is Hawaiian or whatever. Like, person of color means so much. So I think that if you're really fighting against anti-Blackness and racism, like, and you're centering Black voices and you're making sure to like uplift Black experiences and trying to support the movement, it's great, because it shouldn't fall all on Black people to organize these events. So that's my opinion.
I heard that people were taking knees around the country June 1st at 5 p.m. as respect and bringing that horrific event back to its meaning. Honestly, I was thinking how long it was and how extremely painful and hard it was for just me, and I have never experienced anything like that, and I will never be able to relate to that because of the color of my skin. And then I was just thinking about how heavy it must be for people of color. We ignore a lot of problems in our country for pride and shame, I think, and I think a lot of that is handed down. And I think the first step that I took in trying to make a change, or at least understanding it better, and I think the first step a lot of people need to take, is being accountable for just knowing your privilege, knowing what it means to be white in this country, and knowing just the history and educating yourself. I feel like in this march and in a lot of actions of mine speaking out, I need to be respectful, because I will never understand, and I do not want to come across as pretending to understand someone else's pain and someone else's sorrow, because it is really a major problem. I mean, I believe that slavery never really went away. It just, because we never dealt with it, it just kept evolving. We're always trying to attack the problem that's at hand when we're not really looking at the ongoing problem. I think we need to be consistent with our voice and keep inspiring people until we see that change.
I think white privilege gives you the ability to kind of sit back and observe what's going on, not really need to jump in and be an advocate or an ally. But I think that's what makes Martha's Vineyard special. We had all walks of life out there.
I definitely feel like a lot of people think that like Black Lives Matter is like a trend. Like on Instagram, people are just, you only see posts about like Black Lives Matter. I feel like when this happens, like when an officer kills a Black life, but my goal pretty much is to like keep this group going.
We're all, whether we'd like to admit it or not, like each of us is complicit in that system, and that it's important that we take action to fight for Black people and their rights and their unique experience in this country, and the ways in which they have been oppressed, and the ways in which they're viewed by not only the police, but by almost every system. We weren't just fighting against police brutality, but public health. Black people are disproportionately taken advantage of and mistreated in health practices and public education. The school to prison pipeline disproportionately affects Black people. And so there's so many ways in which racism is a part of this country. We're just taking steps every day to recognize that and recognize the ways in which we can be actively anti-racist.
At the end, I felt like this is just the beginning, that our community loves us. There's so much love and there's so much strength and there's so much power in this community, and that everything's going to be good. We're going to get through this together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and learned a lot, and would certainly encourage those who are on the island to donate all those small items and things that you just don't even think about, but they have great significance if you actually donate them, and they end up in the library, in the museum, and will stay there for posterity's sake. So thank you very much, Heather, for that great presentation. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on now and hear from Allison Malik, representing the Oak Bluffs Library. Allison, take it away.
Hi, thanks so much, Carole, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'm going to play a short video just in the background so that you guys have something to look at that is not my face. So let me go ahead and just start this with no sound. So my name is Allison Malik. I'm the director of the Oak Bluffs Public Library. And once again, we are honored to celebrate the rich history and culture of Black Americans as part of this collaborative Black History Month event. And as always, the library is deeply honored to be part of this and want to extend my thanks to Maria Rougeau, Dr. Lorna Andrade, Dr. Thelma Johnson for inviting us to be part of this conversation every year. And as always, it is always an honor to be on the same panel as the incomparable Carole Copeland Thomas, who always offers us a masterclass in how to leverage your experience and patience, as we can see from that chat issue, to facilitate this event. So thank you so much, Carole, for being here with us as always. So today, all of us are here to recognize the spirit of resistance that's defined the Black experience and to celebrate the remarkable individuals who have stood up against injustice and oppression. So I'm playing this video because for those who are not aware, and for the rest of us who never get tired of hearing this, Oak Bluffs is a significant place of power for Black culture in America. The town has a rich history of African-American vacations, resort-style living that dates back to the 1800s for Black Americans seeking respite from the discrimination and segregation faced in cities across America. Our town became known as a place of celebration where Black culture and community flourished. That is not to say it did not have its darker sides, it absolutely did. But you know, to honor that, you know, and as you're seeing on your screen, we've got folks here who tell both sides of that story. In recent decades, Oak Bluffs has maintained its significance as a place of power for Black culture and a popular destination for African-American vacations, reunions, conferences, and we continue to host cultural events and festivals that celebrate Black heritage and traditions, including the library's own Sankofa Festival, which we host every year during the first weekend of August. I'm going to switch over and start playing a video that we put together that just kind of showcases the library. Oh, there I am. Okay. So as part of the Oak Bluffs community and as head of its library, I'm both humbled and proud to be part of this town to help play a role in preserving and promoting the history and the legacy of Black Americans. Our library is not only a place of learning and knowledge, but also a place of celebration and cultural enrichment. So it's February. You're going to see some of our February displays here in a minute. And even though, yes, it's Black History Month, Oak Bluffs Library celebrates Black history year-round. Through the year, we offer a range of programs and events that highlight the contributions of Black Americans to our nation and to our town, including exhibitions of artifacts, readings of poetry and prose, and presentations by local scholars and by especially local artists. The video that you're seeing of our library showcases so many of our resources displayed so that our community has easy access to the materials that inform current and future generations about all of our collective stories. For centuries, Black Americans have faced numerous challenges and obstacles, but never giving up the fight for freedom and equality. And so many of these stories on display here, from the Underground Railroad, and we saw the Harriet Tubman story, to the Civil Rights Movement, to redlining, which continues to restrict home ownership, and to confronting racially motivated brutality. Black Americans have shown remarkable courage, resilience, and determination. And like I said before, we showcase those stories. In the moment, we continue to face these ongoing challenges, and we are reminded of the power of resistance and the role it plays in shaping our world. It is a reminder that we cannot take our rights and freedoms for granted. We have to continue to fight for justice and equality for all. And for some of us, that means using the power and the privilege that we have in order to bring that justice to everyone. Our library, as every library, has an important role to play to educate future generations, to learn from and to navigate our collective histories. On a positive note, so much of our collection has been curated to acknowledge the contributions of Black Americans who've made their mark on history through resistance and determination. Our library is also committed to carrying forward this legacy of resistance and to building a brighter, more inclusive future for all. In the past, Black stories were often ignored or overlooked or misrepresented, but today we're seeing a growing recognition of the importance of preserving and celebrating Black stories and experiences. You saw from the museum's own videos just a few moments ago that we are endeavoring to record these stories and in the moments so that they can be recorded for the historic record. So from books, film, and music and other media, we're able to gain an understanding of the complexities of this Black experience. Now, what you're seeing here is that for our own community, the Oak Bluffs Library is deepening its commitment to preserving these local stories by investing in a digital recording equipment studio and a resource we call our Digital Memory Lab. And you can see all of the equipment now on your screen. A lot of this is legacy equipment that's like 40 years old, but if you've got VHS tapes of your home movies and this is something that you need recorded for the digital historic record, that's why this is here, and we can help you do that. So whether you're a lifelong resident of Oak Bluffs or a newcomer to our community or just an occasional visitor, I invite you to join us as we celebrate and explore the rich history and culture of Black Americans, both past and present. And on behalf of the Oak Bluffs Library, thanks for joining us today. I am going to paste again our YouTube channel so that today's recording can be accessed there later, as well as our website. If you're interested in the recording studio, please get in touch with us. We're so excited to hear and preserve your stories. And until we can see you again, once again, thank you for joining us. Oh, Carole, I believe you're still muted.
I love that recording studio. That's very, very cool. It's like StoryCorps.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. So again, lots of great resources. And if you're on the island, if you're going to be there for any point in time on your vacation, definitely stop in and see all the great resources that they have. Thank you very much, Allison. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you. And we're going to now bring on Toni Kaufman. She is the newly elected president or president-elect of the NAACP Martha's Vineyard branch. Toni, take it away.
Wow, I just can't get over all of the things that I just saw. To our distinguished speaker, Carole Copeland Thomas, our co-chairs, Dr. Lorna Andrade, Maria Rujo, and Dr. Thelma Johnson, representing the League of Women Voters, ASALH, and our Martha's Vineyard community panelist, Allison Malik, the Oak Bluffs Library, and Heather Seeger of the Martha's Vineyard Museum. And of course, to all of you who decided to join us today. Good morning. My name, as Carole said, is Toni Kaufman, and I am the newly elected president of the Martha's Vineyard branch of the NAACP. Thank goodness we could be on Zoom today because it is, according to my phone, currently it is 5 degrees. So Zoom was definitely the way for us to make this presentation to all of you for Black History Month. The vision of NAACP, or the mission, is to achieve equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people and all persons of color. I am humbled to add my name to the rolls of millions who have served in this mighty organization. Many are actually participants today and have served for decades. not only with the national organization of NAACP, but also with the Martha's Vineyard branch. NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, more commonly known to all of you as the NAACP. Today, there are 2,200 units across the country. Unfortunately, time will not permit me to give you an extensive history of NAACP, but I encourage you on your own to Google. We can Google almost everything these days. To go on Google and explore the NAACP, its roots, its beginnings, those who had a passion for starting this organization in order to right the wrongs in this country. Why join the NAACP? The struggle for civil rights in America has always been and remains a slow, painful, and often violent process. As we know from the occurrence for Tyree Nichols' death in the last couple of weeks that we heard about, a week does not pass in our country without a disturbing, high-profile racial incident that causes us to search our souls for answers. Often sensationally newsworthy, these events raise our consciousness and awareness of inequality, but it's usually just for a moment in time. Incidents of racial bigotry in the workplace or the public arena enrage us and become fodder for the comment section of the newspaper or for folks to voice their opinions on social media until the next occurrence. It never ceases to astonish me that we are having the same conversation in the 21st century that so many generations before us have had. And when we have that conversation, or while we have that conversation, the list of those who have been violently killed grows. On January 3rd, 2023, 11 other community members joined me in stepping up to dedicate themselves to the principles and the mission of equality and justice. I would be remiss if I did not share their names. First Vice President Rita Brown, Second Vice President Russell Ashton, Treasurer Jenny Gadowski, Secretary Alex Palmer, and our executive committee members are folks that you know: Eric Blake, Janelle Gadowski, Susie Pacheco, Grace Robinson, Raleigh Russell, Susanna Sturgis, Carrie Tankard, and Joel Weintraub. I applaud their dedication and courage. Serving with them is certainly an honor. Just think about it. In the NAACP of Martha's Vineyard was initiated in 1963. Think about that time frame. At the height of civil rights movement, civil unrest, we became a unit here on the Vineyard. We want to encourage our members and those of you who maybe have thought about being a member of the NAACP to become actively engaged. Maybe your passion is health, which we have a very robust program that was initiated and has been carried out and executed by our former chair, Dr. Lorna Andrade. Education, political action, youth, climate change and environment, scholarship, labor relations, and other areas of advocacy. We meet the third Saturday of each month at 11 a.m. And for the time being, like many organizations, we're on Zoom. We hope to do a hybrid program in the near future where folks who would like to come in person will be able to accommodate that. If you'd like to contact us to join or to ask questions or to even think about being a part of the committees that you might have a passion for, you can contact us at NAACP MV Pres, P-R-E-S, at gmail.com or NAACP MV Secretary at gmail.com. And Allison, I'm going to ask if you could put that in the, well, I guess in the Q&A, since we are unable to do the chat at this time. There's much work to be done in the Vineyard. And I use that term because the Vineyard means so much to all of us, but the Vineyard could be many other places as well. It's not just a physical location. It's about the work that needs to be done. And the laborers are few. I was going to share some other things about the things that are going on the Vineyard, but I do believe that between Heather and Allison, they have given you a very detailed view of how things are going on the Vineyard, where you can have access to information, and certainly listening to those wonderful, wonderful young people. I'm hoping that during our time or during my time as president, that we will be able to have a more robust youth committee to work on the things that a different perspective they bring to an organization such as the NAACP. To quote Dr. King, every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Thank you for allowing me to speak today. All, please be blessed beyond measure and have a great day, no matter what. Thank you.
That was a fantastic presentation, Tony Kaufman. Welcome to the NAACP and the leadership role that you currently are playing. We know that you're going to have great success. And your presentation reminded me of the selfish act that was created a few months ago by the governor of Florida, sending up the asylum seekers, mostly from Venezuela, who landed and were graciously treated by the people of Martha's Vineyard. It backfired on him and he looked like a fool because of what he did. So I want to publicly thank all of you on the Vineyard for the humanity and the dignity that was expressed with every single person who came your way unannounced, and how graciously that they were greeted and how warmly they were treated. So again, congratulations on that. Thank you. We're going to move on, and thank you very much. I have worked on chat. You know, Zoom makes lots of changes, and I think that they made a little change where they automatically, as my friend Catherine LeBlanc sent me a message, they automatically disable chat. I have turned that feature off now. So I think you can chat, but you may not be able to because this webinar has already started. So you can continue to use the Q&A box, and obviously we're reading both the chats, information in the chat box and also the Q&A box. So again, thank you so much. Zoom does interesting things, but we are definitely hearing you loudly and clearly. We're going to now talk about the League of Women Voters with Marie Araújo and also Dr. Lorna Andrade.
Well, I'm going to jump in here first, and I want to say thank you all, and to Maria Rougeau, who has been our treasurer of this league for over 25 years. God bless her. And I, a former past president of the league. Marie's going to give you a little history, and she's going to start off with one of our congruent beliefs. Go ahead, Marie.
Good morning, everyone. The first local league was chartered in 1966 as the League of Women Voters of Finsbury, and in 1966 became the League of Women Voters of Martha's Vineyard. The league is a diverse and nonpartisan organization. We have taken formal positions that advocate for local environmental issues, including recycling and land use, affordable housing, streamlining costs of our public schools, and climate change initiatives. The league sponsors town candidate forums in the spring and also for special elections throughout the year, voter registration at the high school, and promotes also healthcare advocacy. On election day, League of Women Voters members stand at strategic locations, such as the post office in Vineyard Haven, holding a vote banner. As we know, voting is one of the most important ways to make change, and we encourage everyone to use it. We are currently meeting on Zoom, first Saturday of the month at 9 a.m. We encourage anyone who is interested to join us to continue the work of those who led the way. And we do have a website that is very up to date and has all the information about the league on it and how to join. So we encourage you to use that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie and Dr. Lorna, for the comments about the League of Women Voters. Any more information you want to share with us?
I think she did a great job. She covered all the essentials. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We have the leader of ASALH, who is out of the country right now and has some internet dynamics that are taking place. I know how that is. I was out of the country a few days ago, and it can be a little dicey. So in her stead, Dr. Thelma Hart Johnson was not able to be with us today. She normally would be here, but speaking on her behalf is Dr. Lorna Andrade, who will talk about the society that was started by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Take it away, and I will start the video when you prompt me.
Okay, in lieu of time, I'm going to ask Carole to start the video now, and then we'll have our music after the video. Please.
Will do. All right, give me a few seconds and I'll get it going.
Today, as a rule, we take notice only of the undesirable Negroes and ignore those who are struggling to climb upward. The Association for the Study of Negro Life and History finds by scientific investigation that the record of the Negro is not to be despised.
Oh, freedom.
By creating an arsenal of scholarship to combat the lie that African Americans had no history, Carter Godwin Woodson, known as the father of Black History Month, would begin to break the barriers of prejudice that would enlighten generations to come. Woodson was born in 1875 in New Canton, Virginia, the fifth of James and Anna Liza Woodson's 9 children. As the son of former slaves, Woodson grew up extremely poor, working on his family's farm and attending school only a few months out of the year. In 1892, Woodson joined the large migration of African Americans to West Virginia to work in the coal mines. There he met Oliver Jones, an intellectually curious Civil War veteran who operated a tea room for black miners. Since Woodson was literate, Jones urged him to read a wide variety of publications allowed in the shop in exchange for food. Having engaged in discussions about the history of the race, Woodson claimed it was one of the most enlightening experiences of his life. In 1895, Woodson enrolled in Douglas High School in Huntington, West Virginia, completing his studies within a year. Woodson would go on to earn a doctorate from Harvard in 1912, in addition to his degrees from Berea College and the University of Chicago. He remains the first and only person born to former slaves to obtain a PhD in the field of history. Woodson traveled to Africa, Asia, and Europe, teaching in the Philippines and studying at the Sorbonne. Having been taught throughout his schooling that African Americans had no history, Woodson would devote his life to challenging the narrative. His exhaustive research would lay the foundation for African American studies to this day.
His writings are meticulous. He believed in scientific research at a time when many historians were not using it. Much of the fault we find in distorting Black history came from professors who taught history. They had an agenda, and often it was entirely wrong.
Woodson published almost 20 books over his lifetime, covering a broad range of topics in African American history. But he knew that to legitimize the contributions of African Americans, he would need to reach beyond the scholars. In September 1915, at the Wabash YMCA in Chicago, Woodson created the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. Now known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, or ASALH, the organization would become an outlet to educate the world about Black history.
This society publishes magazines, researches in Negro history, directs studies in clubs and schools, promotes the home study of the Negro by mail, produces texts on the Negro for schools and colleges, collects and preserves the valuable documents of Negro history, supplies libraries with special collections of rare books on the Negro, and educates promising and enterprising young men for service in historical research.
Woodson also established the Journal of Negro History, a scholarly journal where Black and white intellectuals could publish their studies. The journal also provided a medium to publish little-known primary documents on African American history. It must be noted that Woodson sought to launch a movement to legitimize African American history during an era of overt racism and mob violence. Yet Woodson believed that education was the catalyst needed to bring about social change and destroy the racist beliefs.
So what Dr. Woodson did was he was debunking the lies about us. So they were literally proving our humanity when he was building up these resources and documenting the truth about our history, and he was talking to real people who had done the work.
There's only one history, and all ethnic groups, all races should have chapters within that history. Few people thought like that before Woodson. He wasn't seeking any kind of superiority. He just wanted people to be equal. And once you know about each other, you're not holding their differences against them. You are respecting them more. To me, that's groundbreaking.
Woodson briefly returned to academia in 1919, serving as a dean at both Howard University and West Virginia Collegiate Institute. However, Woodson, who was deemed radical for insisting on textbook revisions to incorporate African American history, often clashed with administrators and other scholars. By 1922, he would return from West Virginia to Washington, D.C., and devote himself full-time to conducting research and publishing prolifically. That same year, Woodson purchased a home that would serve as his residence and headquarters of the association for the rest of his life. Here he would create his own publishing house, Associated Publishers, to print material on African American history ignored by others and generate an income for himself. The climate of the 1920s brought new interest in Black history. Movements in that decade, such as the Harlem Renaissance, created a heightened sense of racial consciousness among African Americans. Woodson was educating people of their heritage, one of which they could be proud. His home office became a community focal point in the Shaw neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Black intellectuals, activists, writers, and artists flocked to his home in support of the movement. There, Woodson also trained a new generation of scholars. while his protégés had immense respect for his passion and selfless dedication to the cause. Woodson's exacting personality often made him difficult to work with. He expected others to work as hard as he did and would clash with those who did not share his vision.
And Woodson, he could be very blunt. He could be very direct and and very opinionated in many ways. And so African American and white audiences alike didn't always appreciate that. But that was Woodson.
And he was a perfectionist. Everything that went out of that office had to be perfect. And once we were typing, and we had typed about 300 letters, and he found out that one word was hyphenated wrong. We had to do those 300 letters all over.
By the 1930s, Woodson would become more publicly outspoken. In 1933, he published his seminal work, The Miseducation of the Negro, a scathing critique of systemic racism in education and of blacks who would not challenge it. The book would become a manifesto for generations of African American activists advocating radical social change. Woodson expanded his public presence by giving speeches and writing articles and columns in newspapers. He engaged teachers, clergymen, fraternal groups, and black civic leaders to reach the masses. Committed to teaching people at all levels of education, he created the Negro History Bulletin in 1937. The bulletin told the stories of the near great and was aimed primarily for the general black community. For Woodson, history belonged to everyone, and it was too important to be left to the scholars. He would create Negro History Week to ensure that the rich history of African Americans would be taught worldwide. The week-long celebration during the second week in February, in honor of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, would later evolve to Black History Month. It remains today as one of Woodson's most lasting legacies.
In our own country, we find that the Negro, in spite of his enslavement, achieved likewise. Negroes felled the trees, drained the swamps, cultivated the soil, produced the staples upon which the wealth of our Southland has been based. We shall overcome.
Woodson died in 1950 on the eve of the Civil Rights Movement. His pioneering efforts to preserve and publicize the historical heritage of Black Americans would prove essential in the struggle for equality. By institutionalizing the study of African American history, Carter G. Woodson would begin to break down the barriers of racial prejudice and hate and transform minds to this day.
He gave us a truer understanding of the United States by showing us that African Americans contributed mightily to this nation. But all this has happened because he brought truth to light.
Let the knowing.
Dr. Lorna, would you like me to go on and play Lift Every Voice, or would you like to make comments first?
I want to make the comments first and then lift every voice, please.
Excellent. All right.
So on behalf of our president, Dr. Thelma Johnson, I just wanted to share with everybody that we meet in the summers. Most of our members are away during the winter. However, we do have two programs that we do. Fall is our Founders Day program, and because of the pandemic, we've had it on Zoom. Prior to that, we usually hold our meetings at the Oak Bluffs Library. And of course, Dr. Carter G. Woodson's birthday celebration, of which we usually hold during the month of December, the first part of December. And lastly, I want to say to you all that you can go to our website, asalhmv.org, and you can look at how much our dues are, the exact dates we meet, some of our past programs, and what we're going to be doing coming up this summer as well. So please do. And thank you. And Carole will now let us here lift every voice and sing.
That song always moves me to tears.
And me too.
That rendition, yes.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lorna. Closing comments from you, and then we'll move on for Q&A with Allison as we wrap up this fantastic program.
I just want to say to you, Carole, thank you. Thank you so very much. And right now I'm so emotional after Lift Every Voice, because I'm thinking about that poor young man who cried out for his mother and was so close, and it just hit me so hard. And I'm sorry, you guys, that I don't break down easily. But these last 2 weeks have been just too much for me, too much.
For all of us.
And
Yes.
for all of us. And I know we can do better, and we can't let the DeSantis, those that think like him, do what they're trying to do to us. We have to stay strong and learn our history and share it and say, no, DeSantis, we will not let you do this to us. We are going to give the true history. And I want to thank each one of my institutional colleagues here. You all have represented us so well here on the Vineyard, and we all have learned. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so very much. Your expressions, your emotions are with all of us because we all feel the same way. And yes, we will, whether you're on Martha's Vineyard, whether you are in Lakeville, Massachusetts, where I'm located, whether you're in Philadelphia or Denver, Colorado, the answer is no. And the answer is Black resistance. No to the types of legislation that is being passed around the United States. No to the people like Ron DeSantis bringing up asylum seekers into the wonderful, safe, comfort area of Martha's Vineyard, and no to the hate that continues to perpetuate around this country. The answer is no. Allison, take it away.
How do I follow that? All right, well, so we're looking at a couple of the questions that have come in from the Q&A box. I'll start with the last one, one of the last ones that came in, which was, if we could please share the post, the link to the YouTube video for the Woodson video. So I tried to search for it, and I'm not sure if I found the correct one. So if Dr. Lorna or possibly Carole has the link to that video, could we just post that in the chat? Some notes of congratulations are coming in from Joan Condon, who says congratulations and thanks everyone for an inspiring morning. Deborah Britton says the same. Thanks for an inspiring program of hope. The generous collaborative effort was very well done. The diversity of presentations has given us all much to think about as we consider our personal ways of tackling the resistance of today. Again, thanks. Deborah Britton, guest of Dr. Thelma Johnson. I'm not seeing too many actual questions, mostly just people using the Q&A box for just saying thank you to today's collaborators and, you know, as just leaving words of, you know, congratulations and thanks to the team here today. I would encourage everyone to open up the Q&A box because people have been using it to post links to other resources or other organizations through today's presentation. So take a look through those to see if there's anything that you want to note for your own research later. And with that, I think that everyone's actual questions have been answered. So at this point, I would just invite anyone who has any remaining questions to use the Q&A. So Joan wrote again, she says, do you have any tips on how we can prevent getting overwhelmed and discouraged? What an important question. I think that we all need the answer to that in our own lives in so many different ways, but in this in particular, I guess I would just ask every member of our panel, maybe starting with Carole Copeland Thomas, how do we prevent getting overwhelmed and discouraged in the face of everything that we're up against?
Well, thanks so much for that great question. I'll first say that in the chat, I did put the page that I created for critical race theory. And I have a whole page of information about what it is that describes it, and then various resources so that we can educate ourselves about the importance of it and the kind of legislation that is being passed around the United States to prevent it. So that link is in the chat box. You'll be able to get that. In terms of what we can do, as Dr. Lorna had just expressed very emotionally so, we have to wake up. And as had been in the Lift Every Voice and Sing video that you saw one of the signs that said the alarm bell was just not hit now, it was hit in 1619, we just keep hitting the snooze button. Is that, as I had described with Harriet Tubman, and the Reconstruction period and the period after Reconstruction, is that if we're not paying attention to what is taking place in our country that has cyclically so taken place, that we will continue to repeat this, that there will always be, unfortunately, forces that want to pull back and go back in time to an era where the control levers were controlled by different people. And when you share power, there are some people who don't want to have power shared. And that's what you're seeing from a political point of view with Ron DeSantis, the Florida antics that are taking place, Greg Abbott in Texas, the governor in Texas, the things that he's doing. And so, pay attention to what is being said and done legislatively so with various states. You can do that and you don't have to politically get involved. A lot of people are very afraid of, they don't want to deal with politics. They want to stay away from politics. I think that's impossible to do, but there are ways that you can at least educate yourself about what is taking place and then look at the patterns that are happening, the comments that are being made, and stand up and say, no, be a resistor and say, no, we have to acknowledge what has happened historically. So we have to look at the Harriet Tubmans and the others. And I can certainly be a force for change, regardless of who I happen to be. That would be my comment.
I'm reminded of a leadership training that I went to a few years ago, and it talked about being like the power of being the second person to speak. Like when you are in a room and you do not like the message that's being relayed, and you've got the one person who's courageous enough to stand up and say something, and then the crickets in the room just are deafening. Sometimes what it takes is to be the second person who stands up and says, I am with them and I stand with what they are resisting, in the face of, kind of overwhelming power sometimes. Maybe you don't have the strength to be number one, but I think we can all find the strength to be that second person or the third or the fourth. And I think that the power in numbers that we talked about earlier definitely falls into the political realm, and as Carole continues to tell us, like we cannot be apolitical. I think that this is where all of the change happens. So yes, leaning on resources like the League of Women Voters to stay informed, but I mean more than that, I think that we really need to start tapping the people in our community who can really be great political leaders and just telling them, like, we are behind you. All you need to do is run and we will help you. To get those people who can speak with your voice in a realm that matters is something that I've been trying to look around, here to do. And I'm speaking just as a library advocate who tries to preserve a community for everyone who lives here, and being faced with some decisions, just at town government level, that tend to have the effect or the possibility of stripping some of those resources away from the people who need them the most. So I'm thinking, who can I ask to run for select board who would be open to making sure that everyone here is taken care of and not just the people who we like being here, and so like I, in my position, have to be apolitical, but it doesn't always work that way. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess for my part, it's looking around and seeing a young upstart and trying to put the bug of local office in their ear, and possibly there are folks like that in your communities too.
If I may add to that, the question was, how do we prevent from being overwhelmed and discouraged? I think that we saw something today that for me was a great encouragement, and that was hearing the young people on Heather's video speaking about their perspectives of this topic that we have wrestled with for such a very long time. They're our hope. And we have to, as Allison has said, we need to be that, perhaps be that person who is behind them, who is encouraging them, who are giving them the opportunity to speak, to use their voices. They just hearing today was just wonderful. I do plan to reach out to those young people who were so courageous in their sharing. And the thoughts that they had were deep thoughts. They weren't surface thoughts. They were deep thoughts about how we can look differently at what we're dealing with. So I think that the encouragement is that there are young people out there that have that thought. As I said earlier, many of our leaders in this community have done so for decades. And it is time, I think, to hand that torch onto our young people, but still being available to them to share the history, to share the feelings, to share the thoughts, which is absolutely being done in this community. And I'm so proud to be a part of that. So don't be discouraged. I truly believe that though it has been a conversation that has occurred for such a very long time, it's one that needs to continue. I don't know where we'll be, if we will even see, those of us who are here today, if we will even see an eradication of inequality, but we can't give up. We have to continue to be awake or woke, as it has been said, and look at legislation, be aware of what's going on in our own community, because it's here too. It is here. We have many things that are redeeming about this community, but there are other things that we need to examine and to resist against, or have that resistance, and not just Black resistance, but resistance in all, humanely resistance. So don't be discouraged. And when you feel overwhelmed, just, reach out to someone who can lift you up, who can take that heavy spirit off your shoulders for just a few minutes, maybe. Find joy in your life, but continue to move forward. And that's what we're all going to try and do. I hope that's helpful.
That was, thank you, Tony. It was beautiful and inspiring. And I would offer this, if you do get in touch with the folks that appeared in the video put together by the Martha's Vineyard Museum, please let them know that if they live in Oak Bluffs, we have a school committee position available, as well as 2 select board positions available this year, and the nomination papers are due by February 23rd, and we will all sign and support them. So I hope somebody is interested. We don't really have any other questions coming in, just additional words of thanks and recognition of that today was inspiring. And so I would say that the Q&A portion is likely concluded. So I think I will just turn it back to Carole for last remarks and farewells.
Thank you so much, Allison. Love your activism too, and being the second voice. That's a powerful message. Yes, very much so. Would like to have Marie, Dr. Lorna, and Heather to make their closing comments, and then we will conclude this program. Thank you very much.
I would just say thank you for joining us for our 7th collaborative event. Hope that you all enjoyed it. It sounds like you did. And stay warm. Stay warm.
I too want to thank everybody and encourage people to find joy in the resistance. That joy itself can be an act of resistance, and not letting ourselves get too overburdened by the work. And we have plenty of examples of that through history, who coupled their resistance with joy. I also just want to make a plug for places like the library and the museum, who are deeply invested in truth. And so much of what we see these days is that sort of surface understanding, people making up their own stories about what's going on. And the museum and the library can both be places where you can come and find the information that you need to really ground your work and your resistance in truth. And I think that's something that the museum offered when the NAACP was advocating for the plaques to be removed from the Civil War statue. And it's that commitment to truth is something that we're really committed to, and committed to doing our part to make sure that we can contextualize the moment that we're in now, looking back so that we can create a better future together.
And I just want to say again, thanks to each one of you, for all of you who support us each year for our program with this education being delivered. And I can only say, yes, truth, truth, joy, joy. And please participate and share education. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And Tony, you'll have the last words, and I'll have our organizers to just stick around for a little bit as our group concludes after Tony's comments. Thank you.
Tony, you're muted.
Thank you. I think I've said quite a bit already. I'll just share something that I gave in another presentation, and that is an African-American slave spiritual hymn and a civil rights protest song dating to the early 19th century. The song describes being planted by the water like a tree. We shall not be moved. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you all very much to all the organizations, the collaborative organizations, the Martha's Vineyard branch of the NAACP, ASALH for the League of Women Voters, the Martha's Vineyard Museum, and the Oak Bluffs Public Library. We say thank you so much. Go out there, make it a great day, educate, inform people, and exercise your level of resistance or Black resistance in everything that you do, certainly here during Black History Month and beyond. Thank you all so very much. Take care.
I know. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. We'll have our leaders to stay on with us. Great. We see a little one in the background too. Thank you all very much.